On today's show, Spencer Carbery is the Jack Adams winner.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about defensive depth on the Capitals. We know that there is going to be some free agents, not necessarily this season, but next season. So some potential holes in the blue line for the Capitals. Who's going to step up and fill those holes? I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about goaltending depth. Yes, we know Logan, Thompson, and Charlie Lindgren are going to be the answer for at least the next 3 seasons. But down the pipeline, who is going to be the next Capitals netminder? But just to get it going here, talking about the big news this weekend that head coach Spencer Carbery is the winner of the Jack Adams Award. Let's hear it for Spencer Carbery, a guy that is definitely deserving of this award. We saw that Arneal and Martin St. Louis were the other front runners to win the Jack Adams Award. But when you take a look at what Spencer Carbery has been able to accomplish with this roster, it is quite something, quite a departure, I guess you will, from the former head coach and Peter Laviolette, that this guy has a rapport, that it helps that there is some familiarity as he coached for Hershey. He also coached for the Stingrays, for the Carolina team there as well. And just has a really great way with the players on the team that he knows how to coach the young players. He knows how to coach, just marquee future Hall of Famers like Alex Ovechkin. That to have that skill set is quite remarkable. So let's dive into that in segment number 1, talking about Carbs and just an outstanding head coach for this team. And it was interesting. He was sitting down with Monumental Sports for a basic end of season review. And instead, he was greeted with a surprise video. And if you saw this, you could tell that he did not see this coming. There were messages from mentors like Jared Bednar, and then the entrance of the man carrying the Jack Adams Award. And Carbery is now officially the NHL's coach of the year, and the Capitals coach to win it, the first coach to win it since 2016 when Barry Trotz won that award. Before that, Bruce Boudreau in recent memory. So it has been some time, and it's interesting that looking back on it already, it's been since 2016. How the time flies, but quite a moment and a great tip of the hat to Spencer Carbery, a guy that has got a lot out of this team. So let's do that. Let's take a moment to appreciate that. This franchise just had its most important coaching win in almost a decade. And it kind of just fits along with this great story of the Capitals this season. The last team the year before to qualify for a playoff spot, the first to clinch a spot, to win the Metro, to win the Eastern Conference, to make it to the second round. And oftentimes head coaches don't get the credit I think that they deserve. Now, listen, if you want that, exemplified, take a look at the roster and what, former head coaches, you saw Laviolette not be able to get a whole lot out of the team. Again, I know there were some big additions made to the team, but I think that Spencer Carbery, like I said, the perfect coach right here, right now. And Carbery's journey is almost, like I said, almost like the makings of a movie. He's now the first coach in history to win Coach of the Year honors in the ECHL, AHL, and now the National Hockey League, all with teams that are connected to the Capitals. And to be honest with you, when I first heard that Spencer Carbery was the head coach, I was happy about it. I thought maybe, at the time there were more established names that maybe popped off the page a little bit more. But now we really see that come into focus, that Carbs is the absolute perfect coach for this team right now. You take a look at it, ECHL with the South Carolina Stingrays in 2014, AHL with the Hershey Bears in 2021, and now in 2025, the Jack Adams Award winner, mic drop. I think that Spencer Carbery is marking a lot of things off his list for accomplishments. And I know that winning the Stanley Cup would be a nice cherry on top, and that very well might be in the cards in the future, but quite an accomplishment for Carbery. And let's be honest, Carbery didn't walk into a perfect situation. It was a changing of the guard, if you will, that there were some players that stepped away. Backstrom, Oshie, Kuznetsov, and he had an aging core, a captain chasing Wayne Gretzky's record, a major trade in Pierre-Luc Dubois, that, let's be honest, we know now that was a great move, but last summer we didn't know that, a bit of a reclamation project, and young players trying to find their place. You take a look at Connor McMichael, you see Alexei Protas, a lot of different players elevating their game to the next level and under the direction and leadership of Spencer Carbery. And yet 51 wins, top of the East, and the first playoff series win since 2018. That's impact. That the Capitals were able to do a thing they hadn't done in quite some time, make it to the second round. Again, I wish that they had made a deeper push, but all things considered, quite an accomplishment for Spencer Carbery. And Carbery spoke about trust, about communication, and about passion. And I think he exemplifies all of those things. As he is the guy that has to give out the tough love. He's got to be the cheerleader for the team at times. And, to be a great head coach is like being a great manager, a leader, except with higher stakes, that you need to win games or you won't be around too long. And Spencer Carbery, when he first came here and this team was floundering a little bit, I think there was questions if he was the right head coach. But what it was the players just, fully understanding the systems and tweaks here and there, right? That, it is about Pierre-Luc Dubois. It's about Logan Thompson, Chychrun, that it's the complete package that has put the Capitals in the position that they're in right now. So quite an accomplishment, what Carbs has been able to put up thus far. And it's not just about lip service. Connor McMichael said, quote, "He believed in me and I could feel that confidence," unquote. And that's one of the things I've spoke about on this show is confidence. The confidence in Alexei Protas and Connor McMichael, two players that were good players, but are now great players, putting up career numbers. And, that's the confidence that, hey, I've seen what you can do at the lower level. I know that you have it within you to get it done, when maybe a head coach like Peter Laviolette didn't have as much faith in the young players. Spencer Carbery has that. One, because he has a rapport with young players, but more specifically, he has a rapport and a history with young Capitals players. Anthony Beauvillier only played under Carbery for a few months and described him as one of the best communicators he's ever worked with. And think about it. He was only here since the trade deadline. That is quite a ringing endorsement of the head coach. So many players have said the same thing about Carbery. Doesn't just manage a bench. He builds relationships. And those are the kind of things that, you can't teach to everyone. You see about a lot of the head coaches that have certain levels of success. I think Spencer Carbery is a multi-tiered, great leader, a great person at the end of the day. And, that's something that's not easily quantifiable, is saying, I'm going to go ahead and say Spencer Carbery is a great coach. I get that, the Jack Adams winner, but just a great human being, to be able to have interpersonal skills and be able to relate to players, not just as a coach, but just about building relationships with them as people. And with young guys like Protas and McMichael stepping up and Dubois resurrecting his game with the Capitals, that clearly translates to his performance. So, like I said, I think that, head coaches and Spencer Carbery more specifically, I don't think it's the credit that he deserves, or coaches. I mean, he did get the credit. He won the Jack Adams, but I think that when you think of, head coaches, big picture, that you think, yeah, the players play the game. The coaches, they just kind of, it's all about it. And if you want examples of it, take a look at teams that had a big change. Spencer Carbery coming to the Capitals, Knobloch joining the Oilers. Remember the Oilers and how they were floundering before he joined that team. That head coaches definitely get the most out of the players. The players play the game, but it's about positioning. It's about relationships. And Spencer Carbery has all those skills in his skill set, big time. The question is Carbery just getting started? Because if this is what it looks like right now, the next few seasons could be truly something. That the Capitals did not make it past the second round this season. And I had a hard time taking that. And I imagine, you as Capitals fans had a hard time dealing with that as well. But just to consider that this might be just truly the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the head coach of Spencer Carbery and what he has planned for this team. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about net minding depth. We know it is LT. It's Charlie Lindgren for the foreseeable future, but who are the future netminders of the Capitals? I'll discuss straight ahead. Ever check your banking account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. And the one thing I love about it is I can manage my money with my wife. They have systems in place where you can work on your financial goals together, so you can try to build money not just for today, but for the long term. And when I started using Monarch Money, I realized certain things, how much money I was spending on eating out and food delivery. And now I budget smarter. Instead of juggling, the multiple apps that are out there, you can use Monarch Money to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2, we're talking about goaltending depth. And the one thing that the Capitals have right now is stability in net. It's something that the Capitals had here in recent memory. I think back to Braden Holtby and Philip Grubauer and what that tandem was able to get accomplished. Win a Stanley Cup. Pretty good, right? But there was quite a change, and not in a good way. That when Braden Holtby left town, and so did Grubauer, that the Capitals had two players that they said, we're going to be next-level netminders. More specifically, Samsonov and Vitek Vanacek. And both of those netminders were inconsistent, to say the least. They've gone on and done some pretty good things, but the Capitals right here, right now, are much better with Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren, kind of a 1A, 1B situation. So let's dive into that. Let's talk about the netminding tandem for the Capitals on the big team and look down to the Bears, the Stingrays, and kind of what is some of the trajectory for the Capitals netminding. So you take a look at it, Charlie Lindgren, Logan Thompson are both signed for at least 3 more seasons. So stability in net. I guess something crazy could happen and they could trade Charlie Lindgren or something like that. But I don't think that's the case. I know that this Capitals team wanted to make a big hack, or that is what Chris Patrick said. So I guess any player is kind of in flux. But for me right now, Charlie Lindgren, Logan Thompson, I'm going to say are going to be here at least the next 3 years. Thompson closed out the year strong. Take a look at it. 25, 26 is going to be the starter. But make no mistake, this will likely be a 1A, 1B situation. He started, ended the season strong last season, faltered a little bit, but, was clutch. I'm going to go ahead and say in the Capitals in the playoffs that he figures to be the de facto starter in the 25-26 season. Charlie Lindgren, no slouch in his own right, will most likely be the 1B situation, but hey, crazy things could happen in camp. Maybe, for some reason, Logan Thompson, doesn't come in real confidently and Charlie Lindgren does. Well, that is a good situation for the Capitals as well as kind of, a rarity in the National Hockey League. Some teams out there are searching for a really great number one netminder and, hopefully, a netminder that can play okay as the backup. The Capitals have an excellent tandem in LT and Charlie Lindgren. And that's what works in today's NHL. Look around the league. Load management is real and it's smart. That you take a look at it, that when you make it to the playoffs, your netminder isn't so gassed that they can't play. Some people kind of questioned that about Holtby in 2018, that he faltered a little bit and it required Philip Grubauer to come in. And then, the rest is history. Holtby came back in and the Capitals won a Stanley Cup. But it's all about different coaching philosophies. And it's easy to say that, we want to alternate starts between the netminders. Again, not every team has the luxury that the Capitals have in a Logan Thompson, Charlie Lindgren tandem, that, the Capitals are able to do that because they have faith in both of those netminders. If you look around the league, sometimes they ride the hot hand because the hot hand is really all they have. That once you go to the backup, well, that is where things can get a bit tricky. But the big thing here now is, what about Hershey? We know that Hunter Shepard most likely will be on to the next one, that Clay Stevenson will most likely be the new number one. And, kind of what has been around the organization as the thought of being the long-term answer in net. Now, what does the long-term answer in net mean? Being that Logan Thompson is locked up to a long-term deal, so is Charlie Lindgren, a 3-year deal, that unless they trade someone or, something of that nature, that even though you're the number one in net for Hershey, I guess that puts you 3 in the organization. It might be out a little bit further than we think. But behind Clay Stevenson, that's where it gets interesting. Mitchell Gibson, a restricted free agent, is expected to get a deal and likely challenge for the backup role in the AHL with the Bears. But here's where it gets interesting. Garen Bjorklund, who just re-signed, and Antoine Keller, who's coming over on a 1-year AHL deal, that it might be a battle in net for who is going to be netminder number 2 for Hershey. I like it. I love talking about netminding, and I love battles to who is going to be the starter and the backup. Right now, it's June, really early prediction, and it's, I already said it, Clay Stevenson, not too surprising, I think is going to be the number 1, but, depending on what happens with Gibson and then, Garen Bjorklund and Antoine Keller kind of battling it out, it could be very, very interesting. So it's going to be a 3-man battle, all things considered, and definitely a storyline to follow. Of course, I will have you guys covered on Locked On Capitals. I also have some contacts with the Hershey Bears. You've seen them on the show before as well. That once it intensifies, I'll have them weigh in on their thoughts on the whole battle with Hershey as well. But you take a look at it, and one of the 2 names could see significant ECHL time with the Stingrays as well. So, it's about getting, the AHL affiliate solidified. The team that's one step down from the NHL, that you are, in Clay Stevenson's case, most likely going to be the number 3, that if there's an injury, you're the next man up and it's your time to shine. I think that Clay Stevenson can be that. We haven't seen any real indicators that he can be, as he hasn't really flashed at the NHL level, but take a look at it, solidifying the AHL. We know that the NHL team is all buttoned up. Get the AHL team solidified, and also, the 2 players that are going to be the netminders, let's say it's Bjorklund and Antoine Keller, for example, playing for the ECHL Stingrays. That is also going to be a super exciting storyline to follow as well, to see which one of those netminders is the number 1 for the Stingrays team. I don't know if you can tell, I get really excited about the net minding and how it's going to work out. The pecking order of who's number one, number two at the respective 3 pro team levels here. It's going to be really exciting. Now, you take a look at it even deeper, if you will. Prospects Chase Clark and Nicholas Kempf remain in the NCAA. So the goalie pipeline is healthy, but the competition is heating up. And there's already some talk out there is if the Capitals could use a late round pick in the 2025 draft to add another goalie to the mix. It couldn't hurt. But I think that all of that is going to be determined about what happens with Mitchell Gibson, something of that nature, or maybe they plan on trading one of these guys that you can almost have too much talent. But with that being said, having another netminder ready to go isn't a bad idea because you see what happens if there's injuries on the NHL team and the ripple down effect that has for the AHL and ECHL team. That it wouldn't hurt to have another netminder in the wings, if you will. And then there was also an interesting conversation as well that they were talking about the possibility of adding a third netminder for NHL teams, just to have them with the team all the time. So just kind of a side note there about ideas that are being floated out this summer about netminding, about having a third netminder always travel with the team. It's a unique position for that position because oftentimes, you have a healthy scratch that can fill in on a forward position. You have a healthy scratch that ostensibly can fill in on a defensive position. But most times you don't travel with 3 netminders because you're chewing up a roster spot. I think that would be the right idea to have that third netminder. Kind of think back to the COVID era and when they did some of that as well. A lot of interesting moving parts for the Capitals, for the Hershey Bears, the Stingrays, but also the NHL at large. It is definitely going to be an interesting storyline to follow. And of course, I will have you guys covered on Locked On Capitals the entire way. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about defensive depth and the free agency outlook. I'm going to talk about some players that are under contract, but maybe would be a fit because, listen, if Carlson is on the move or say TVR, those are some big shoes to fill. Who is up to fill those shoes? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment here, we're talking defensive depth for the Capitals, prospects, maybe players that they could trade for and acquire on July 1st. A lot of intriguing questions. And if it's a trade, it could even happen before that. So let's talk about it. I think the Capitals' blue line is good right now. You saw the additions of Roy. You saw the addition of Chychrun. And the players that were in the cupboard for the Capitals at the end of the season, Alexeyev, Ethan Bear, Dylan McElrath, that it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out. Just initial takes, Alex Alexeyev, I wasn't in love with his game. That I would want to see what's behind door number 2 on him. Ethan Bear, we saw him have a bounce back season with Hershey this last year, but didn't get a chance to show what he had at an NHL level. And I love Dylan McElrath's game. I want him around as a physicality factor to have if you're playing a heavy team. That I think he would be a good answer. So let's dive into defensive depth for the Capitals. Again, say, Carlson was on the move. That is going to create a hole. And who is going to fill the holes on this team? And taking a closer look at the blue line, this could be a sneaky spot where the Capitals made a move. The top 4 is solid. Chychrun and Carlson are your top pair. We also seen Sandin a bit in there as well, but I think Sandin is better on the second pairing. Matt Roy and Martin Fehérváry. But when Fehérváry went down in the playoffs, the depth was seriously tested. And that's one of the things I spoke about as well, is that, the Capitals didn't want to make any big moves at the trade deadline because they didn't want to mess up the chemistry, right? That, we don't want to mess up a good thing because, of the ghosts of Philip Forsberg past and all that. But with that said, you don't necessarily have to deplete your farm team to do that. You take a look at the teams around the league that do it well. They don't necessarily have to do that. You don't have to relive the Philip Forsberg thing all over again. That, you can trade out a piece that might be on the move in the off season, or maybe you just don't see in the grander plans. So that's interesting. And then you take a look at the deep pairings and see how they shake out. You see that Sandin sometimes played better, not on the top pairing, but on maybe the second pairing, third pairing, something of that nature, that sometimes when these players are just adjusted a little bit, you can get the most out of them. But it's going to, be a potential change if Karlsson or say TVR is on the move, who is going to slot here and there. That's where it gets interesting. And like I talk about, when you reach into the cupboard, you want a guy that can step in and do a really great job. You take a look at Alex Alexiev. Was he horrible? No. Could he have played better? Yes. Gave effort, but lacked consistency. You take a look at Dylan McIlrath, to his own admission, is not the best skater in the world. He's not the quickest skater in the world. That is ultimately why I don't think he was chosen in the playoffs, even though against Carolina could have made it interesting. Say they made it past that and made it to say they played the Panthers. That could have been increasingly interesting because of the physicality factor of the Panthers. So for me, my take on it, I love having a physical player in the cupboard that can answer the bell. We have Wilson. To have Dylan McIlrath, I just like it. And like I said, Ethan Bear, we didn't get a big enough, we didn't get an opportunity to see him on the NHL. That he, like I said, had a bounce back season after, he was in the NHL PA system, that there was, high hopes for him, but, we didn't see that translate to the NHL. So a maybe. So that's not ideal. It's not ideal to have, pretty much 3 question marks. I guess I would scratch out Dylan McIlrath as a question mark for me. Just my own personal feelings. I want to keep him around. I don't even want to touch that idea. But Alexiev and Ethan Bear, 2 question marks. Let's leave it at that. And, we have guys, that are the next wave, or that's what we think. I'm talking Vinny Iorio and Chase Prisky. But, we saw Vincent Iorio before. We've seen snippets of him on the big team. Hasn't necessarily been like, oh, wow, this is the guy. But, how would Vinny look if we had a more extended look at him? Maybe next season would be that season. Say they moved out a piece here or there, or Chase Prisky. It's interesting, but they're still kind of in development. So that's where it gets interesting. July 1st, free agency. Again, I didn't see the moves that the Capitals made last summer happening. If you had Pierre-Luc Dubois joining the Capitals on your bingo card, you should probably gamble a little bit more, because you definitely know how to take gambles and have big wins. The Capitals need to consider adding a veteran third pairing defenseman, someone who can handle minutes if a top 4 guy gets hurt again. Now, listen, some of these guys are under contract. Sometimes I float these names and people are like, what, this guy? Are you serious? That guy? Listen, these are all options, players that necessarily, the Capitals wouldn't have to give up the farm to get. Matt Dumba, I've always liked his game. Physical, but still mobile. Ilya Lyubushkin, proven shutdown option. And Kelvin DeHaan, experienced and responsible. Those are names out there. I understand they're under current contracts, but, if the Capitals do make a trade and they want to bring someone in, I wouldn't be too upset if a Dumba came in to join this team. That you're not necessarily looking for, a top pairing. You're looking for someone that could fill in the gaps. But cap space is a factor, of course, especially with John Karlsson and TVR entering contract years. So it makes it interesting, right? John Karlsson, we love John Karlsson. We understand the lay of the land and what he's done for this team. Same goes for TVR, who had a better season last season than the one before. That say for some reason, they're on the move, either this year or next season, you need to kind of have your eyes set for the future. Karlsson is eligible for an extension in July, but there's no guarantees yet. Chris Patrick and the Capitals organization, non-committal. John Karlsson, non-committal. I think that as far as Carly is concerned, he wants to see in what direction this team wants to go in. Are they looking for a leading voice? Is he willing to sign, let's say, a 1 to 2 year deal at a reduced rate? Maybe. But, he's a premier defenseman, rear guard, blue liner that he could go out there and get a raise. So is he going to be want to take a hometown discount, a Capitals discount to stay here? I guess it kind of just depends on how he sees things shaking out. Like I said, does this team seem like it's kind of positioning itself for a Stanley Cup push this year? Maybe keep them around, or maybe if they have their eyes set for the future, maybe they go in a younger direction. I think there's a lot of questions for number 74 as well. So the front office has to walk a fine line. They need depth, but they also need flexibility. And with several defensemen in the pipeline, still 1 or 2 years away, a short-term signing could be the key, making this sure this team doesn't stall out again come playoff time. I don't want to go into the playoffs next year, with a premier defender getting injured and then like, oh wow, we didn't plan for this. Break glass, it's an emergency. Out comes Alex Alexiev. Not exactly what you were looking for. I would prefer to reach into the cupboard and have it be an NHL ready Vinny Iorio or a Chase Prisky or a player that they acquired in the offseason. So I think that it is something, at least say it's not, a guy that's going to take on a bigger role, at least a depth blue liner. I don't want to stand in the way of progress for Vinny Iorio or Chase Prisky, but I definitely don't want to go into the postseason with a lot of question marks. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.